Hello and welcome to the first proper episode of the Ancient Warfare podcast of 2023. We did an AWA last week, but actually by the time you're hearing it's probably another one. But we're going to talk about the new issue this time. And we're going to talk about piracy in the ancient world, which is a topic I think we have barely touched upon in so many years of ancient warfare. So it's definitely time to look at that because it's a nice an interesting topic where land and naval warfare sort of cross the line. It's not just amphibious. It's about raiding and it's about capturing, kidnapping people, and of course attacking ships at sea. We don't have very many questions right now, but I'm pretty sure that we'll come up with stuff to keep us occupied. The first question we do have is pretty fundamental to the whole theme. That's Brian's, a patron of ours, and he asks, when does a merchant become a pirate and vice versa? Who would like to tackle that one?
Well, I'm going to suggest that, first of all, we have to agree to speak in pirate accents. So for the whole show, it has to be pirate accents, right? Otherwise, it's not authentic.
Greek, it has to be Greek accents.
We should be doing this on September the 19th.
Yeah, Pirate Day.
Is that Talk Like a Pirate Day?
That is International Talk Like a Pirate Day.
Yes, but I'm not from the West Country, no.
Well, I think it's sort of Devonian as opposed, because actually that would be the Port of Plymouth. So that would be. Let me throw this as a possible answer, specifically in respect of Roman times. That the whole category was latrocinium, which is basically lawlessness, and it covers everything from basically robberies, sedition, slave revolts. It's a whole category. Basically, people acting against the normal course of everyday life as dictated by Roman law. So when does a merchant become a pirate? When the state decides that they're not doing lawful things, I think is the argument. And that's as far as I think you can define it.
I think you can take it one step further and actually say that it's when they choose to as well, in terms of, it's amongst the various, examples that you can go into. I think, one example that comes to mind is the Athenians going to on a diplomatic mission to talk to Mausolus, the ruler of Caria, and they are on their way and they come across some Egyptian ships. The Egyptian ships look good, even though they're diplomats. They decide that this opportunity can't be passed by, so therefore they attack these Egyptian ships that are going past. The reason why these Egyptian ships are, seen as fair game is that at that time, we're talking about the early 4th century, and of course at that time, Athens is on good terms with the Persians, but the Persians are having some issues with the Egyptians at the time. So therefore, the Athenians consider that they are on the right side to have a go at these Egyptians, take what they want of them, and declare that it is public booty for them to take home. And as long as they dedicate a little bit to the goddess Athena when they get home, everything's shipshape. So it all suits when you want to be a merchant, when you want to be a diplomat, and when you want to just go over and a little bit of piracy on the side.
I think another important thing to remember is that when we live in 2023, personal violence and the use of personal violence is really, as violent as the world we live in is, it's not readily available to us the way it is in previous periods. I mean, it's legal to be violent, basically, in most places in the modern world. You can't do it without getting in trouble, but that's certainly not the case in the ancient world, right? The capacity for violence, the carrying of weapons, the expectation that you would know how to use them, and the ability to turn on a dime from one activity to a violent activity is a much more exaggerated and accelerated thing by our standards. So it's, if you're, exactly what Mark says, when you have the ability to do it in a much more effective way than he would in 2020. Merchant ships around here don't have weapons.
Well, with the important difference between the period that Mark discussed and that Lindsay touched upon, at the time of the Roman Empire, there is just one state in the Mediterranean, at least. So it's there's not the excuse of they belong to somebody else or they're not one of ours. Indeed, there is a state that can say not allowed we're going to come after you.
Well, I mean, Thucydides complains about piracy. Murray, correct me if I'm wrong here. He complains about it in the 5th century BC. So, I mean, there's definitely, it's a thing when there's multiple states.
Well, I mean, the fact is that there's as much piracy now as there ever has been in the history of the world. You know, the idea that we've got law on the seas is completely contradicted by the amount of piracy that's happening in the world now. You know, and so it's kind of it's a constant.
There's a difference though today in terms of, I think there's not the same linkage or, you know, association between piracy and warfare as there was in the ancient world. I think there's that much more that you can, yes, there's going to be piracy for piracy's sake, but at the same time you can have the likes of Demetrius the Besieger actually employing pirate fleets to, when he's actually attacking Rhodes, deciding he hasn't got enough ships for the attack to actually attend to all areas of the island. So therefore he recruits pirates to actually attack local smaller harbors to supplement what he's doing, his main siege. There is that linkage between the two, rather than today they are seen as, I think, pretty, you know, very different situations.
I came across several examples of Hellenistic monarchs employing the archipirata, such as Demetrius employed Timocles, and in the Roman Seleucid War of 190 BC, we had Antiochus III's Admiral Polixenetus. He employed Nicander to attack Panormus, and I wondered why there was, and I have only a handful of examples, but why these major kings with a lot of resources would employ pirates, or at least that's what they were written as, or to history. And I was thinking that probably for kings, even though they had access to vast resources, those resources were not inexhaustible. So that if you had pirates who were willing to finance their own ships, expeditions against an enemy, and maybe share plunder, at least whatever they did would be harming your enemy, a monarch would like that because it would not be a drain on his own fiscal resources. And in addition, I was thinking that probably real nautical skill was not something that was easy to come by, and pirates probably were extremely talented. And if you were going to war very soon and you had pirates that had these maritime skills, employing them in some degree, either officially or not officially, that would be of great benefit, great immediate benefit.
Going back to your first point, I think, I take the situation like the examples you gave. Lysimachus attacks Ephesus, and he's got a general Lycon who is is using pirates in the, again, siege tactics, but as soon as the objective is achieved, the pirates are sent away. There is that element of you can actually discard them when you don't want to be associated with them anymore. So therefore, and you can also, it's plausible deniability in terms of if they're not doing what, or if something happens that you're not wanting to really own up to, it's, well, they weren't my men after all.
So they're mercenaries, except that you actually pay them. They take their cut from the spoils they pick up. Yeah.
And to build on that point, I'm thinking that pirates are either going to be attacking your shipping or your enemy's shipping. So employing them in some sort of official capacity, or right, that is, however you want to call that, allied with you, means so that they attack your enemy and not your own shipping. That probably makes a lot of sense. So why did they employ pirates? Well, probably to have them on their own side as opposed to their enemy's side.
There's probably also going to be a situation of what's in a name. I mean, are these some kind of there are pirates in the ancient world, clearly, who just lives in some coastal village, akin to Somalian type now. They live in a coastal village. They see naval ships coming by. Maybe they live near a handy choke point, and they just dart out with some small ships, capture a ship, plunder it, done. And there are clearly pirate fleets that have a lot more resources and can range far further. I mean, another example is Sertorius, who actually makes a deal with the Cilician pirates. So that's, Sertorius in Spain, the Cilician pirates in Turkey. That's two sides of the Mediterranean. If they're doing, there's some kind of long distance communication at least, and possible actual travel all that way.
In that example, that's actually an interesting one, because they end up getting involved in North African politics in terms of supporting claimants to thrones and whatnot, and they seem to be sort of ranging not just when they're called upon, but they seem to be more an organized band look out there looking for opportunities, very different to many other examples that you sort of come across.
But there's actually an economic incentive driven to that is connected to geography. And this is something that I'm really interested in when I was thinking during for this podcast. If you think about it, the Mediterranean is uniquely designed to sort of abet this kind of sea trade, because at the time, right, you have coastal hugging vessels that really don't do well on open water. They've got an island hopper, they've got to stick to coasts. You have a disparity in the types of goods produced. And Lindsay, don't get mad at me if I'm talking business here and I'm wrong, but in a disparity of kinds of goods produced, the North African coast, right, versus the Southern European coast, that's where you make money, right? Because you got people who got things that other people don't have or want to pay for. Okay, well now, if you want to get from Africa back to Europe, where are you going to go, right? You're going to go off the southeast coast of the Peloponnese, island hop on the Cyclades, where you can take on fresh water, where you can repair your ships, where you can take shelter from storms. You're going to go to Crete, and then you've reduced your 500-mile trip across open water to like 200 miles. You have Corsica, you have Sardinia. If you look at the Spanish coast, you can go right there across the straits and go around. This is very, very different from what you see in the Atlantic and the Pacific. And I think when you combine the state of shipping technology in the ancient world and the sort of unique, geological formation of islands that exist in Mediterranean. Oh, and there's no tides, right? Because the Mediterranean is enclosed and there's tides, but not like we experienced on the Atlantic and the Pacific. So the economic incentive for thessocratic power all of a sudden explodes in a really unique way. And I don't know that anybody's ever made that point in a book. I think it's definitely worth exploring. So it doesn't surprise me when you say, Mark, that you have these economically incentivized pirates intervening in elections or being interested in what North African states do. Man, that's how they're going to make their money, right? Whether or not the ports are open. I have no proof of this. Other than the geography, I think, is a pretty unassailable point, as is the shipping technology. I don't have proof of how that dovetails into what Sertorius is doing, but I do think that makes a lot of sense. I don't know if other folks agree.
I'm holding up a book now for the listeners who cannot actually obviously see it. It's called The Corrupting Sea by Nicholas Purcell and Peregrine Horden. That's a very important book that looks at the circumstances of the Mediterranean in its geography. It actually goes further than what Mike says. There are the prevailing winds in the Mediterranean are northerly, so it's pretty easy to go to the North African coast, and the current is counterclockwise. So if you want to come back, you have to sail. Say that you are in Carthage, or later in Rome, you're going to Egypt to pick up grain. If you want to sail back to Rome, you sail east from, say, Alexandria. You sail east till you get to the Levant. You go up the coast of the Levant, and then you go west past all the Cilician coast, the Greek islands, until you hit the Adriatic. Then you go across, you go straight to Messina and up north to Rome. You pass by lots of, coves, bays, promontories, where pirates can go, I see somebody coming. Their ships are, generally they're sailing ships or they're small galleys that really can't make a lot of speed. So if you catch them, it's very, if you sort of come from an unexpected direction, it's very hard to avoid being caught by pirates.
Yeah, and that's why the Cilician pirates so-called pirates were very successful, and they seem to have traveled all the way across the Anatolian coast. I don't seem to find any evidence that they were limited just to their particular neck of the woods. I was going to throw this in. At what point does, for example, a revolutionary, I'm thinking Sextus Pompeius or Sertorius, get to be considered a pirate? Because the way I'm looking at it is, is that Sextus Pompeius, for example, was standing in a sense against the second triumvirate, Mark Antony, Lepidus, and Octavian, on the basis that he was continuing the revolution that his father, Pompey the Great, had, the sort of against Julius Caesar. And what he resorted to was, in taking over Sicily, was to harass the grain ships coming up and down servicing Rome, which is a big problem if you're trying to keep Rome and its population placated because you feed them grain free, of course. And this was a weak point. So he would probably think of himself as a revolutionary, but as far as the triumvirate is concerned, they're pirates.
Yeah, it's a point of view thing. It's the same thing as people say about terrorism. The one man's terrorist, another man's freedom fighter. And in the case of Sextus Pompeius, you could possibly make an argument that he didn't even have to bother very many grain ships to just by being in Sicily, which of course at the time is important to point out, is also an enormously important source of grain for Rome. So he just occupies that source just disappears. And just by being on Sicily, he threatens the grain ships. He doesn't even have to go after them. I think there's actually a description in Appian, I remember from a long time ago, where grain ships see the pirates, but they just get away unscathed. But I mean, in Roman times, the market works like it would now. It's that one source is gone and the other source is threatened. So the prices go sky high. And then you have a problem. You don't even have to be a pirate to have a very severe economic effect.
Yeah. I was just wondering, in a sense, the pirates to us in the 21st century have a very particular meaning. They have a lot of baggage, obviously, from the last 2 or 3 centuries. But I'm just wondering, there it was a case of, we go back to the Latrocinium, which is the lawlessness aspect of it, which is that these people are just out to shake the fundaments of society, and therefore are bad, and we have to hunt them down for that reason. Whereas, of course, these people are saying, well, I'm standing for principle. I've got a reason for doing it.
Well, yeah, and I think the freedom fighter, analogy works, because in some communities, like the Somali pilots and the ones off the coast, Indonesian pirates, and they are Robin Hood-like figures. They are robbing from the rich, and they are poor, and they are giving to their poor community. So there is that kind of romanticizing still in that kind of idea. So it's a really fascinating perpetuation, really, of that idea. And I think the thing is, of course, that the winners, who generally are the suppressors of the pirates, are the ones who get to write the story that the pirates were bad. We never get the piratical victor who then rewrites themselves as a winner. But you can see, I think it's in the history of Crete and the arguments over the Roman governance of Crete, that some are bad, some are pirates, some are good governors. And you're like, hang on, but you're the same guys. So it really is the winners write history. So
Thomas Examus is a pretty famous colonel in modern military circles. He wrote a book called The Sling and the Stone, I think in 2001 or something. And one of the points that he made is that in the Horn of Africa and a lot of these Somali villages, that being a pirate is how you get status. It's how you become a village headman. It's how you get a wife. It's how you get respect in the communities. What American, like if you hijack an American freighter, like you're the man. And it's become like a cultural thing on the north coast of the Horn of Africa. And I wonder if a similar, this is the thing when so tough about ancient history, is that like there's such a paucity of sources, is that I'm sure there's a cultural current. If the city is complaining about it, sure. Excuse me, Thucydides, we had this Kappa conversation before. I apologize. But I'm sure there were cultural currents that ran through, depending on where you lived. And I wish you had visibility into them, but I don't think we did.
Well, of course, we've got to go a Viking, and the point we were making at the start, that Vikings were farmers. They were traders. They were just people who decided, hey, let's go and raid the vulnerable coast of Britain and elsewhere in Europe. And don't apologize. I'm about to call them Thucydides, and I say Cilician. So we're fine with the Kappa or the C. So it's a fascinating cultural thing, but I think there's that problem that a lot of us get in trouble for using analogous history, to talk about ancient piracy and use examples of modern piracy and Viking age piracy and go, you can't do that. You're like, but in the last 2,000 years, you've got these two models, which are very similar in some aspects. why can't anthropologically that be taken backwards and go,
Well,
this is
but,
just
but you can. I mean, we have examples. Look at Homer. I mean, what all those Greeks sitting outside Troy, what are they going to do? They go and raid other coastal communities.
Achilles was a pirate.
And they come back with booty, and then that's good for their it's good for their status and how, you know, we don't have the sources, not in that case, but the article by Owain Williams in this issue has a glimpse of what it might be on the Assyrian side a couple of centuries later, when possibly Greeks come and raid a coastal community. I mean, it's very hard to imagine that the Hittites, or, you know, anybody who lived on the coast of Turkey at the time of you know, when an Achilles-like person raided their village, would have interpreted it as anything else but a form of piracy, even if the word at the time probably didn't exist yet.
I think it's our sources, our modern, like, you know, secondary sources seem to be very, you know, two poles of this in terms of, you know, should we say there is no definition? The D'Souza book that's referenced in the further reading in this edition of the magazine goes into the instance of the Greeks going into the Eastern Mediterranean, and the idea that, well, they're moving goods in terms of pottery, etc., back from Syria and whatnot, and it's a clear sign that's merchant trading, not piracy. On the other hand, you've got other sources actually saying no, it's an example of piracy. I think it comes down to, you know, semantics of definition, basically, which side you take.
Yeah, just to return to Murray and Jasper's point, there are universal traits that are human and that don't change over time. And I do think that that's something that historians often struggle with, is well, you can't compare one to the other. No, there are things that humans do because we're humans, because we're animals. The example I wanted to give is when I was a company grade officer, I had 57 sailors, United States Coast Guard, so we're the law, right? I swear, in the 2 years I was with my unit, 4 years I was with my unit, I had one stabbing, I had a couple of thefts, I had an assault. When they were idle, they would get into stuff. You know, these are fighting young men. And I do think that is a universal characteristic that is no different in 1500 BC than it is in 2023. I don't think that that's a crazy stretch to say.
I think the other thing, of course, about the example of Homer is that is very much the winner's writing. These are heroic exploits, not dastardly piracy. But the other thing I think that piracy offers is anonymity, because you're turning up in a community who doesn't know who you are, as opposed to, you know, the 17th century pirate, where we see the Jolly Roger and we know they're pirates. I think there is an anonymousness to piracy in some cases, that they raid, they destroy, and they leave. And, you know, who do you give a description to? Well, they were men from the sea clad in bronze. That's who we'll look for then. Thank you, sir. We'll go and arrest all the men from the sea dressed in bronze. You know,
bronze men from the sea.
So exactly. So that kind of anonymity, and, you know, going on a raid, getting away with it.
But is there anonymity in terms of, like, in going to perhaps maybe the later piracy in the classical period, in that they are actually, no, I guess the earlier period as well, in terms of is kidnapping right throughout, and so there is that organization aspect of there has to be a delivery of the ransom to a certain point, so there is a connection there. It's whether you just end up kidnapping the wrong guy, like Gaius Julius Caesar coming back after you, and actually following the trail back, or whether they cut their loss and just leave that in the past. But there must be, to some extent, some knowledge of identity as to who takes the money, what's the trail of the money.
Yeah, I wonder whether part of it's actually the identity is a group. They are pirates rather than it is the pirate Captain X. These are very, I think
Dread pirates. Of course,
yeah, there's not the Dread Pirate Roberts. Yeah, absolutely. But I think the issue could be that they are both, because of course you're going to get pirates who, that's the name of Simon Elliott's latest book, that he calls Carausius the Pirate King, that he's putting out his status as I am this. So that idea that these pirates are centered on the individual, whether they do it themselves or whether they are targeted, like Sertorius, like these individual pirates. But you also get, Pompey's command of the seas is against the pirates. So that kind of, if Pompey calls you a pirate and you're not a pirate, does that mean Pompey can just attack you? I'm just a trader. I've got a big ship laden with goods. You're a pirate. You're mine. Like, wait, what's your recourse? Well, I'm the authority here. So there's a real...
There's also some tit for tat in terms of the name calling as well. The great aspect of Philip II versus the Athenians, and it's, you Athenians are pirates. You're cutting off men heading for my shores, my ports. You're taking Macedonians hostage. You're taking our supplies just because you don't want to come and pay in our markets. And then the Athenians turning around and saying, actually, no, you're the ones cutting off us. You're the pirates. You're the great pirate king of the Greeks, Philip II. So, there is that aspect of it's got currency in terms of a name.
Yeah, there's no slight irony that Pompey the Great's son, Pompey's big campaign against the pirate, and then the next his son is, he's a pirate.
But who's calling him a pirate? Hang on a minute. Yes, he's a
exactly. It's all about it's very much a matter of perspective, it seems, and very limited. You were saying, Murray, you're the man in bronze, and from the sea, we're going to arrest them. There's very limited recourse at sea to any kind of law. There's really only, we get into the topic of what does the Roman Imperial Navy do, and for a long time, it used to be said that they would escort the grain fleets from Egypt to Rome, but I think that's nonsense because they can't.
But see, that's a very 20th century thinking.
You can take a big freighter where you have a couple of people on board, and they can just keep sailing slowly but steadily forever. And your big warship is going to have to stop every night. And what are they going to do? Stop at night and go on shore, and then in the morning, the sailing ship, I can still see them. They're 60 miles away. Let's roll and catch up.
I think the best example of perspective is if I, as a commander, I look at an enemy ship, I attack it because they're an enemy, and I defeat them. A few of them are killed, some of them are left. I have them in my power. Well, I'm going to plunder the ship, right of war, booty, just like we do with baggage trains on land. And because I am merciful, I'm going to let them go. And I leave. What did I do? I sacked an enemy ship and plundered it and showed mercy. What do they see? It's a pirate. He came and killed a bunch of us, stole our stuff. Yeah, it's definitely perspective.
It's funny, although, so I think that one of the other things that we find with piracy and ideas of piracy is identification. That what a pirate looks like, or they have livery, or they have flags, or they have sails that identify their ships as these are the pirate ships. And I think the interesting thing about the ancient world is probably they're just ships, and you don't know whether they're enemy.
Not only are they not just ships, they're also local ships. There seem to be a wide variety of individual styles of where in the Mediterranean you might be talking. They might be individual city-states coming out. You've got the more well-known ones are going to be the Pentacontas coming out of the Adriatic. But on the other hand, the islanders of Samos have actually got their own, small mobile ships that actually, I think it's, where is it?
I think the point is there's a bewildering array of ships, ship types and names. Yeah, and of course, and they may be different. They may also, just the same way we have in our sources, a spear is a spear is a spear, but there are 5 different words.
Is this Polycrates, Mark, who served like?
Yeah, and there's a reference also to them, being so small that you can give chase them, but they'll be disappearing over an isthmus because they're actually hauling their little ships out of the water that they've just come to raid you with.
When I looked at the Spartan siege of Samos and Polycrates, and you see the Corinthians are like jumping to ferry the Spartan army over to get it done, and it's competition, right? It's merchant competition. But Polycrates is famous as a pirate thessalocratic state, so it's really pirate competition, right? It's really that Corinth doesn't like these Samians taking the ships that they would normally be taking. So yeah, let's get Sparta over there to deal with it, which I thought was hysterical.
And during wartime, when a lot of the ships, the major warships, would have been collected in a fleet and gone to battle, or at least concentrated to fight other fleets, that left fewer ships to patrol for pirates. So pirates probably saw, well, there's no guards around, so let's go and take whatever merchant shipping we can find. Further, I think it's Plutarch that says, or maybe Diodorus says, that Demetrius went to Rhodes with hundreds of warships, but was accompanied by about 1,000 civilian cargo ships to supply those 1,000 civilian cargo ships going back and forth would have themselves been targets of pirates. And you can imagine that the major warships during wartime would have been accompanied by a cloud of these smaller vessels, all of which had lucrative cargoes. And who knows, maybe someone would attack another merchantman just because the opportunity was there. And I think that opportunism is probably the chief characteristic of pirates and piracy in the ancient world. That is, if they had the opportunity and they thought they could get away with it, they probably would try it.
I think the other thing, of course, is that there's no, weather broadcast. There's no on the radio to say, "Rob, beware, there are pirates." It's kind of like, yeah, you're out and you're plying a trade. It's like if you don't fish or if you don't trade, you don't live. So they're going to do it regardless of the environment. And we look at the big picture. We're reading the sources about how Pompey is ridding the Mediterranean of pirates. You're like, oh, those pirates must have been really wary that Pompey was on the march. You're like, well, did they know? And so you've got that same idea. And you also, with all of those islands in the Aegean and stretching around the coast of Anatolia, we don't know whether they have signaling systems to give advance warning of the next community of friendly associated pirates who will get a cut of because we told them that there were merchantmen coming. We don't know. But, there's so many pirgi sort of towers which seem to be some kind of fire signaling or smoke signaling points on all of these islands. And again, the best evidence of it before there's fire signaling in Thucydides, there's fire signaling in the Persians by Aeschylus. There's the
Phocians are the on Calidroma when
there's so many sort of examples of signaling that it must have been, and it doesn't have to be complex. It's not Morse code or pre-Morse code. It's fire means prepare, 2 fires means sail now. That's the ones, again, analogous. The fire stations on the southern coast of Britain during the period of the Spanish Armada was fires mean Spanish, no fires means none. So you're like, well, there you go.
Where I do it, maybe just because I'm in the fire service, it'd be white smoke means X, black smoke means Y. I'm serious.
Well, either way, if there was any signaling, you still have some very brazen raids being made. A pirate attack on the port city of Ostia, feeding the capital city of Rome, which is, of course, what triggered the political expedia that Pompey needs to go out there and deal with these guys. That I would say is very daring. In the 60s BC, it's not exactly going up against a small target. So I think there's whatever signals there was. It's a real threat.
If there was no defense, they're going to get more and more brazen.
And speaking of signaling systems, if you consider how many times the Roman navy was surprised by the Carthaginians, you wonder if they had anybody as a lookout, because you would think that a relatively large fleet, operating not far from shore, because ancient fleets did not go too far from shore, and many of these ancient fleets would themselves have necessarily been accompanied by a number of civilian vessels seeking to supply them, one would assume, with food or what have you. The Romans were still many times surprised. So I think that it was very difficult to know who was coming or where, because it really would have required a very comprehensive and costly system of lookouts, which probably most states, and I use that word in the broadest sense of the term, did not have the capability to do.
The ships have also very limited capabilities for lookouts. There are no a warship, especially if it's expecting to fight, has no mass race. So you're maybe 3-4 meters above sea level. That's it.
Well, and also keep in mind identification becomes an issue too. I don't know how thick shipping is in the Mediterranean. It looks pretty thick. Is that even in the modern era, when I worked in naval intelligence, so much of the work I did was equipping ship commanders with the ability to identify radar signatures. Who is that ship on the horizon? Are they friend or the foe? What capabilities do they have? In the ancient world, you're looking like, what is that? Kind of looks like us. These ships aren't machined. Like they all kind of look a little bit different and a little bit the same, and it's kind of hard to tell what's what till they're right on top, especially if the weather's bad.
I came across something. I can't remember if it was an instance in the Greek world. Can't remember who it was, but literally two ships looking at each other across, thinking, okay, they're following us. Are they on the same trade route? They look like a merchant ship and whatnot. And as soon as the wind dropped, of course, that ship behind all of a sudden chucked out some oars, and the merchant ship, which didn't have oars, was in a lot of problems. And it's it is that identification issue.
Yeah. Well, even warships on the same side, the Battle of Salamis, who's that ship down there ramming that enemy? What a brilliant. Well, that's one of our ships ramming one of our ships. No, they're ramming one of the enemy. Although that does raise the issue that is it Polyaenus or one of the other sources, the explanation of that is that Artemisia took on board the flag and had a deception of taking down the identification flag and raising another one, so that either, depending on the story, either she wouldn't be seen by the local Cilician king, or that when Aeschylus's brother, don't want to say his name, too tricky, too many vowels in a row followed by consonants in a row, Amnesius or something like that, he chases her, and that's when she raises the flag, and he breaks off pursuit because he thinks she's an Athenian ship, or has at least changed sides. But there's a reward for her in the Athenians, and the way that Herodotus presents it is that it's how dare a woman make war against us, which is kind of, going back to the Amazons and Theseus and all of that. Or is it that she's a dominant power in Cilicia? Is it? No, it's Caria. That's it. The Carian coast.
Caria, yeah.
Yeah. So the Carian coast, Halicarnassus, is it actually a piratical Thessalonic thing where it's like, yeah, her ships are high quality. We want those ships, or we don't want her to have power in that region. So
I will say this in 2006 and 2008, with radios, with a computer on my chest, with all kinds of modern communications equipment and mapping technology and reconnaissance and you name it, I got shot at. I had no idea who it was. I had no idea where the fire was coming from. I couldn't even see muzzle flashes. I hear rounds hitting, and I don't know I have no clue what's going on. Didn't know what was going on until after the fighting was over. So if it's that bad, this could just be my incompetence. I promise you, it's not just my incompetence. Certainly, I'm plenty incompetent on the battlefield. How much worse for an ancient warrior, right? That chaos, that fog of war, you can only imagine. I love that example you give, Mark, of like, who's that following us? Oh, the oars come out. Oh man, now we're screwed. That's a great. I can imagine that shit.
But that's the story of combat. That's my favorite description in War and Peace, is the Battle of Borodino. And Tolstoy's like, we were doing this over here, but then within a day or two of a battle, it coalesces into this is what happened in the battle. And you're like, but that's not the experience of the individual soldier at the time. That's some agreed narrative afterwards of what happened. But your personal experience is very much, I was doing this thing and this thing happened, but very, and that I think that was the face of battle movement in warfare, which very often in ancient warfare we couldn't do, but then that permeated into ancient warfare, and we got the face of Roman battle, which was an article I think by Philip Sabin back in JRS, and then there was the face of Greek battle, and then sort of started to come through with Pressfield's novels and things like that. So the idea that we can reconstruct the face of Greek or ancient battle, and very often hard to do. Whereas I think, as we were saying before, analogously, the human experience of battle is similar in the sense of you do what you're trained to do or you don't, and you experience combat But then after a certain amount of time and talking to your colleagues, what happened exactly? What did we do? Well, we won on the right, and then the left flank retreated, and then so then suddenly the narrative becomes, well, we won on the right, and the left flank retreated. It's like, which part were you? Well, I was definitely on the right. I wasn't one on the left.
I don't even know where I was. You don't need, the thing is, you don't need to go to Tolstoy. And I'd rather we don't go to Tolstoy because then I have to embarrassingly admit that I haven't read War and Peace. Is we can go to Thucydides, not Thucydides, but Thucydides, the night attack on Epipolae, in the Syracusan expedition. That's a great example of exactly where nobody knows what's going on. Like, people are bumped into each other. There's somebody in front of me. I'm stabbing it. Oh man, that was my dad. Like, it's a disaster. And he does a great job of conveying that just utter chaos. I think Pressfield dramatizes it in Tides of War, his novel. He does. But Thucydides is a great example of that, right in the ancient source.
Well, we've drifted a bit from piracy, I feel.
Well, no, I think that all evolved out of the idea that you don't know.
No, I agree. I was just all I could add is that I think what we know about signaling at sea and an identification of ships at sea is extremely limited, as we've just pointed out, that it's difficult and everybody gets confused. But on that note, maybe next time.
Yeah.
See you next time.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.